Welcome to Military Justice and the Law, presented to you by Bulane Tseo. In today's episode, I'll be discussing history that is relevant to the administration of military justice in South Africa from 1948 up until the 26th of April 1994. In 1948, the National Party won the elections and effectively came into power. However, many Afrikaners were displeased with British practices and values that prevailed in South Africa at the time. This is therefore the reason why the National Party resolved into doing away with the British flavor that prevailed at the time in order to replace it with African-inclined values. So in 1957, the National Party government renamed the Union Defence Force South African Defence Force. The legislature also embarked on many other reforms. For example, the legislature enacted Defence Act 44 of 1957 and incorporated as a first schedule the Military Discipline Code, the MDC. The MDC was not a novel idea of the National Party government because in 1932 already, the Union Military Discipline Code was in existence. So the MDC was basically the Union Military Discipline Code minus the word union, in the sense that offenses that were contained and punishment that were contained in the Union Military Discipline Code were incorporated into the MDC. So also the Defence Act 44 of 1957 made provision for military tribunals, and they were three in number: summary trials, ordinary courts-martial, and general courts-martial. Summary trials could try soldiers who held a rank of staff sergeant and below. In other words, summary trials do not have jurisdiction to try warrant officers and officers, but courts-martial had that jurisdiction. And courts-martial could also try staff sergeants and below who committed serious offenses. So another reform that came about, in order to extinguish, the British flavor, was basically an attempt in 1960 to say, look, let us have a referendum, which eventually came about on the 5th of October 1960, in order to change the country's name from Union of South Africa to the Republic of South Africa. And the majority voted in favor of the change. And the people who participated in the referendum were white South Africans. Blacks did not participate in that. So in 1961 then, the National Party legislature enacted the Constitution of South Africa, Act 32 of 1961, to basically change Union of South Africa to the Republic of South Africa. And that eventually happened on the 31st of May 1961. Union of South Africa ceased to exist. The National Party government was notorious for many other things, especially the institutionalization of apartheid, which was a system that ingrained, racial segregation. It enacted laws where whites were viewed as a superior race who enjoyed dominion over all other races in the country. So the African National Congress, the ANC, resisted these oppressive laws to the extent that the ANC embarked on a series of marches, peaceful marches, to show displeasure with the system. And some ANC members were not happy with these peaceful attempts at speaking with the National Party government, to the extent that a breakaway party was formed, the Pan-African Congress, which came into being on the 6th of April 1959. Hardly a year later, in March 1960, the Pan-African Congress, the PAC, led a march in Sharpeville to fight against these oppressive laws, especially the pass laws, where the natives, had to carry passes or the tompas if ever they are to basically go to the cities where white people resided. So what then happened after that march, or during that march, left many natives bitter, in the sense that the police slaughtered dozens of people, black people, who participated in that march. A year later, in 1961, the apartheid government did not stop with its repressive laws. It is then that Nelson Mandela stated that there are many people who think that it is useless and futile to continue talking peace and non-violence to the government, whose reply are savage attacks against defenseless persons. Soon thereafter, the ANC established its armed wing, Umkhonto weSizwe, the MK. Similarly, Pan-Africanist Congress, the PAC, established POCO, and POCO was to be renamed later on Azanian People Liberation Army, APLA. MK members and APLA members went to exile to receive training there. However, people who were to feel the brunt of this apartheid regime were those who remained behind. There are many people who were arrested and imprisoned for basically resisting that government. And some even died in the process. In 1970, the National Party legislature entrenched its policies of racial segregation by enacting the Homelands and Citizenship Act 26 of 1970, with an idea of establishing homelands, across tribal lines. And that did happen. Transkei, Bophuthatswana, Venda, and Ciskei at different times, came into existence. And they were not viewed as part of South Africa. They were viewed as independent countries, although they did not have, the international appeal, because they were not recognized internationally. So with the passing of time, Transkei, Bophuthatswana, Venda, and Ciskei, the TBVC states, established their own defense forces. Transkei Defense Force, Bophuthatswana, Venda, Ciskei Defense Force as well. So whilst apartheid was taking place in South Africa, the international community did not like that system. This is therefore the reason why the United Nations, in one of its conventions, declared apartheid a crime against humanity. And that led to sanctions being imposed on South Africa. So in 1979, South African Medical Services came into existence to support the South African Army, Navy, and Air Force. Before that, the South African Medical Services, was not an arm of service. It was just a corps that was attached, to the army and these other arms of services. So, because of the sanctions that were imposed on South Africa, the hand of that racist government was forced. It is then that, political prisoners were released, from jail, and the political parties were unbanned. So, in February 1990, Nelson Mandela, was released from prison, and in 1991, talks started between the government and, political parties. There was, basically ventures that were known as the Convention for Democratic South Africa, CODESA. It had CODESA 1 and CODESA 2, where, National Party, government, TPVC states, as well as various political parties sat around the table to discuss a way forward regarding the manner in which South Africa is to be governed. But what came out of that is that, South Africa, had to be a united, non-racial, and non-sexist democratic country. So that was an idea that, prompted the CODESA 1 and CODESA 2. But CODESA negotiations, were basically negotiations that were troubled by many other factors. For example, your Boipatong massacre and the Pisho massacres, they stifled the talks there, among other things. So in 1993, the Multi-Party Negotiating Forum came about to continue with these talks. In November 1993, the Multi-Party Negotiating Forum ratified, certain principles that were to govern a democratic South Africa, in the sense that they brought about the Constitution of the Republic of South Africa, Act 200 of 1993, which was endorsed by that apartheid parliament. So basically, that is all I wanted to cover in this episode, to show that from 1948 up until 26th of April 1994, South Africa was basically governed in accordance with apartheid policies. And it is during this era that the armed wings of the ANC and the PAC came into being, as well as also the TPVC states were formed. So in the next episode, I'll be discussing the democratization of South Africa. So I trust that you enjoyed this episode, and whoever has not subscribed, I appeal to you that you do so. Thank you.